Welcome to the Write Your Family History Writing Challenge, where I ask viewers to submit one document and one profile about their ancestors, and I will take that document and turn it into the start of a story. Now, today I'm actually going to be leveraging ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Claude to get this person started on writing their family history. AI is changing the way we do our family history, and I'll show you how to go through that. Now, the first thing I want to share is that this is a very interesting document. It is submitted by a descendant of Dennis Hurley, and this document was a survey in response to a governmental program to resettle Irish citizens to the Canadian colony in Upper Canada, which was what became known as Ontario. A few years after this resettlement happened, a survey was done of a select sampling of the resettled Irish settlers, and then this document was created asking them questions about their experience. What did they have when they came over to Canada? And then what is the status of their life right now? It's a very, very interesting document, and if you're fortunate enough to have it in your family history, then you will be able to write something similar for your families to discuss what did they start at when they left their homeland and what was life like in their new area. So thankfully, the viewer sent in this document, and then they also sent in the profile over on Ancestry about Dennis, which provided me information about his wife and children. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead and let you know that there were some amazing links here to document what his life was like before he left Ireland and went to Canada, and then his life after Canada. Actually, there weren't a lot of records in Ireland, so that's going to come up later. So we have the profile over on Ancestry, and then we also have the document. So what the first thing we always do is we have to get a transcription. June 1828 survey of 180 households. This document asks questions such as, from whence did you emigrate to Upper Canada and when? And we have a County Cork in the year 1825. What was your trade? A fisherman. And what were your circumstances? I was a poor man. If you were assisted by the public, what assistance was given you? He said passage, provisions of land and farm utensils, and I transcribed his spelling, but then corrected it myself, and that Peter Robinson was the person that helped in the program resettlement, which makes sense because Peter Robinson was the person that led this expedition. And if you didn't know that before, now you have a name to go research social history and more historical context. Had you come out with any money? I love this expression, not one copper. So it goes through and talks about other provisions that he had, how many people came over with him. Did anyone die on the passage? No, no one at all. But how many do you have now? Family, because his wife died. So after landing in Quebec, his wife died, but we're not entirely sure at this point when. So that's definitely a question to put into our back pocket. Bread, pork, milk, butter. And then there was a word that I couldn't read, male and potato stew. So I went ahead and put that question mark. It looks like engine, but I don't even know what that would be. Whenever you're transcribing, go ahead and give your best guess and then denote somehow, hey, I don't know what this is. The record continues, and then it's finally has a date and the name of the individual. Notice that when I do citations, I often just leave a note, hey, this citation is the survey of immigrants. I'm going to have to track down that citation at a later date, but at least I know from whence I got that information. So once you have your transcription, then you have a number of choices. You can manually turn the details into paragraphs, or you can leverage AI tools to get that paragraph writing started. One of the tools you could use is to use Google Gemini, and you could highlight all the text, and then there is a refine option down here at the bottom, and you could say, turn this information into paragraphs. I did that one time and thought that was interesting, but I didn't really like the results. So the lessons learned when it comes to AI is that you should try different programs and find the one that helps you get started in the way you would like. I did go to ChatGPT. I've featured that one here on this channel quite a bit, so I'm not going to feature it here. I'm just going to show you the results, kind of like I magically put it in the oven when you're on those morning shows where they magically put the food in the oven and then they bring out the final results. That's what we're going to do right now. So we're going to go to the copied version of what ChatGPT provided me upon writing this story. Now I went ahead and labeled this version because I have multiple drafts. I labeled it the ChatGPT rewrite. When I am finished with various drafts, I can take that out. But if I wanted to see my progress of the story writing process, it's labeled here. So let's go ahead and see what ChatGPT wrote. Dennis Hurley left County Cork, Ireland in 1825, making the long journey to Upper Canada under the guidance of Mr. Peter Robinson. At the time, Dennis was a poor man earning his living as a fisherman. He had no money of his own to fund the journey and was entirely dependent on public assistance for the move. The government provided him and his family with passage, provisions, a parcel of land, and the farming utensils necessary to bring a new life. It goes on to tell more details and then wraps it up. In his view, it would be far better for a struggling family to accept government assistance upon arrival in Quebec than to be left to fend for himself. Now, were those his exact words? No, but he had responded to a question in the survey that was trying to ask questions as, would it be good for people to get assistance? Do you support this program? So then it's extracting the language. And so maybe we need to go in and revise this and say something to the effect, when asked if it would be better to get assistance from the government if you're struggling, to which Dennis responded yes. And that would be a little more clear. But we're not going to address that too much. I just thought I would point it out that when your relatives are responding to questions prompted and their response is a simple yes or no, be careful how you say what they said. So he indicated, yes, it would be good to do that, but he didn't actually say that. Those were words provided to him, and he agreed. If you have other ways to tackle that situation, let me know in the comments below. But let's go on to what to do next. This story is lacking a lot of depth. I do want to bring back the mention that at this point, I'm consulting what was organized on the Dennis Hurley profile over on Ancestry. So I looked at things such as this information that the curator put, these notes. The ship manifest lists that Dennis and Catherine were 40 years old. So I could leverage the age to put it into the story. Because when you tell your reader how old somebody is when a story takes place, it makes that story more vivid, because we can picture a 40-year-old person leaving as compared to an 18-year-old person. There is a marriage date suggested. It may have been earlier. This person is calculating it based on the age of their oldest child, which is the standard genealogical practice. So because the source is the ship manifest, what does that tell us when we are writing? What that is telling us is not much is known about the family before they left Ireland. So in that case, what can we do? Well, at some points, we will go through and we will talk about the historical push factors that would get Dennis involved in this resettlement program in the first place. We will use speculative language in order to say it's possible this happened and this happened. But we do have a number of clues that will help us understand when we overlay with social history why he would have made this move with his family. So you can write a story about your ancestors even when you have limited information about their early years. You just have to be careful as how you say that. Some other resources that came in handy were the passenger immigration index that would suggest that there is a ship manifest, and then I needed to track it down. Now, this person put this ship manifest as a media image in their gallery, so I was able to reference it here rather than the entire collection, which if you saw my videos about passenger list, I really like to look at the entire passenger list to give a sense of how many people were aboard and so forth. We're not going to do that in that story today, but it could be beneficial for the person who's writing this story later. And then there were a number of other great links. A number of them are on Family Search, and this talks about what happens when Peter gets to Ontario. There is a tale of a township, a history of the location he moved to. Unfortunately, a number of these pages are broken links. So it's just a reminder for everybody out there, you better go out there and double check your links to ensure that everything is working. But I like that they gave me enough information to do a copy and paste and do a Google search to try to find that original record outside of this link. So now that we have reviewed the profile, we can go to the markup page. Everything I did between the previous version and this was manually typing. This was me writing. I didn't use AI, I did it myself. So as I said before, little is known about Dennis Hurley before he departed the Cook Harbor. So the little is known is based on what was gathered on the ancestry profile, and I went ahead and left myself a note so that I can turn that into a citation or a reference note later in the writing step. The information about him departing Cook Harbor, that was again from the ancestry profile, and it refers to this ship manifest. I also went and found another version of that ship manifest, and that led me to this wonderful resource, Peter Robinson Settlers. And if I scroll down or even just do a search, I can find the Dennis Hurley family. This is where I picked up the information about the ship and where it led. And then there is also a link to the actual passenger list. So let's go to some of the other additions I made. They departed Cork Harbor on the ship the Star. That was from that passenger list. And then I went ahead and added Friday. How did I get Friday? Well, I found the day of the week and I got that from a Google search. So that helped. With his wife, Catherine, and 6 children ranging in the ages from 2 months to 19 years. How did I get that information? Well, I took it from the passenger list and I used the first name Catherine and then just truncated everybody's name together in order to make that sentence. The 30-day journey, well, as I've told you many, many times on this channel, do the math for your audience. You can put in the day that it started on this day and ended on this day, and people could do the math, but that's taking them out of the enjoyment of reading them and reading and asking them to figure that out for themselves. Otherwise, they're just not going to care. But if you go in and put in 30-day journey, that just overcomes that lack of data that gives you context. Oh, they were on board ship for 30 days, and you just make it a more enjoyable reading experience. So I will frequently tell you to do the math. Then I wanted to know from Cork Harbor, I have a start location, I have an end location. I tried to map this on Google Maps, but Google Maps did not have a solid way to tell you what is the difference between one location and another. So then I decided to go in to ask Google, and the AI prompt that comes up these days to answer various questions. So AI is now built into your browser. Is it how many miles, nautical miles between the two locations is this? And it gave me a number. And then I can use that as a citation or go try to find out another resource of how to calculate distances. Another time I calculate the mileage. This was between Quebec City and Montreal. And again, I did the date. So now, based on the information on the Ancestry website that took me to a few other things, I was able to put the Peter Robinson program, the ticket number that they had in order to board the ship. It was number 300. I talked about Lord Bantry, and he signed a statement that attested to his character, as well as a Jeremiah Connors. At this time, I don't think I'm going to recommend researching Jeremiah Connors. We might just say, hey, Jeremiah Connors was a neighbor. And then if a relative knows, oh, I know how he's connected, they can add that to the story. Notice here I put the 40-year-old detail that was found on the passenger list. And at this time, I'm talking about he boarded the ship to Quebec. We're doing a little bit of comeback, back and forth. We may keep it this way, may change it around later. But now I'm going to be specific on Dennis, Catherine, also 40-year-old, their children, Brigitte, 19, Michael, 17, Margaret, 15, and so forth. Now, none of his family members died on the voyage. That came from the survey, but then I have a death date for Catherine and when they settled in this location in Ontario. You notice that I keep not saying that location. Well, when you have trouble saying a location, you will want to put in a pronunciation guide. But we're not going to do that at this step. I also found on the passenger record a location in Ireland that the family says they're from, and I left a note that I would need to. This location is hard to read on the available ship manifest. So I'm leaving myself a note saying, I'm not sure if this is the correct spelling, but I also need to research that further, and we'll do that a little bit later. So as you can see, we go through and we mark up this story about things to research, or as we add details like we did up here at the beginning, we leave a note about the sources we use so later we can create the citations in a more proper format. So after marking up and doing some of your preliminary research, what would be the next steps for you to take? If you haven't already, once you mark this up with the records that you currently have available to you, this was everything from the viewer's profile that they sent. Not too much extra research other than things like day of the week, distances. Those are easy, quick wins that I put in this phase. It's now time to add historical context. What was life like in Ireland before Dennis and his family made the move? What was he walking into, so to speak, when he arrived in the new location? We can also talk about the nature of this immigration resettlement program because that's hinted by the type of record we're looking at. He would not have been in that record had he not been part of this project, so we'll want to research that project. So in that case, I will often do a copy of a revised draft and focus in on my research questions that I'm now going to explore. So you know that I check out the source citation note. It's still back there in version 4, and I'll come back to it later, but I'm trying to narrow down what my 3 historical research questions are. First, I want to get more details on the Peter Robinson resettlement program. Now, I keep calling it his. It wasn't really his, but he was instrumental in it. The next question I have is, Lord Bantry signed a recommendation letter for Dennis Hurley, so I want to know a little bit about him. Was he respected, and why would he have signed this in the first place? And the third question I have was, I still feel like this location is not correct because when I type it in, I cannot find that location anywhere. So those are my 3 questions. Well, thankfully, we're going to turn over to Perplexity. I gave Perplexity the scenario that my ancestor was part of this resettlement program. I gave a name of a date of when he emigrated. I gave the name of the project where he settled in Ontario. And then I tell Perplexity what I'm doing. I'm writing the story of his journey, but I'm lacking the historical and social context about the Peter Robinson-led project. What prompted the immigration? What would settlers in 1825, not the first ship to sail, experience on their journey? And what was the situation they would go into Petersboro? Can you offer some insight that it can assist me in writing the story? Notice I don't want Perplexity to write the story for me. Now, before we go on to the response, why would you want to use Perplexity? The great thing about Perplexity is it is a browser on steroids. So unlike ChatGPT, even though it does now have a deep search citation feature, Perplexity's strength is researching, especially for historical context, and then giving you links so that you can further your investigation and ensure that this platform isn't making stuff up. So when you ask it a question, hey, what do you know about this? It does more than what a browser can do for you, like Google or Bing or so forth. It can do the research, understand your search intent, compile the information, and then return it in an analytical written format. But the biggest difference you can see right here with this 1, 2, 3 is it gives you source citations. The other thing I like about this is while it will cite things within the paragraphs that it consulted, often it will give you even more links that it looked at. But even if it didn't quote from it or cite it in the response it gives to you, you can then continue your investigation further. So I really, really like that. The Peter Robinson Emigration Scheme was a British government initiative in the early 19th century to address a severe poverty and social unrest in Ireland. And it goes on and gives some backstory as well as some government acts, such as this one, the Tithe Compensation Act of 1823, which forced Catholic farmers to pay high tithes to the Protestant church. I like that it doesn't tell me what to feel, but I would already react negatively to that. If I'm part of one church program, why am I paying tithes to a church I don't believe in? I could understand that would create a lot of tension. And with my minimal understanding of the nature of the Catholics and Protestants fighting in the United Kingdom, yeah, that helps me understand a little bit of the conflict that is taking place. So that's really great. In response to these pressures, the British government sought to relieve Irish poverty and simultaneously populate and develop its Canadian colony. So now we have some of this context that help us understand the program. Then it goes into a section on the selection of the immigrants and where people were normally from. So that comes back to when I talk about that location where I can't find it on a map. Well, this location needs to be somewhere north of the Black River in Cork County or neighboring counties. We also see some of the provisions, 70 acres of land in Upper Canada, subject to a nominal annual quit rent. I don't even know what that is. So what does that tell us? At some point, we will probably need to research that even further. It goes on to give some information about the voyage, the arrival in Canada, and some details about the initial conditions and support. I love this. On arrival, the settlers found a sparsely populated wilderness. The only significant European presence was Adam Scott Mill. Now, I probably would not have known to look for that, and yet because Perplexity knows what I'm attempting to do and knows that I want to understand the conditions that a settler is arriving at, knowing they have something established as an amenity would definitely benefit my story. So I really like what Perplexity is doing right there. We're going to move on to another question that I asked Perplexity, and this time I'm asking about who is Lord Bantry. Now, instead of just simply asking who is Lord Bantry, I asked Perplexity who is Lord Bantry because he wrote this recommendation in 1825. Tell me who he is and why he would have done that. And Perplexity has no problem giving me a response. Notice right here at the top, there are 4 sources highlighted. There are additional sources that are relevant to the research request. It does pull from a variety of different sources, and even if it doesn't use all of them, it will show you the ones it did reference. So we have a little bit about Lord Bantry. Why did Lord Bantry write the recommendation? And we have an answer. Lord Bantry played a key role in the social and economic life of the region. By 1920s, rural poverty and overpopulation were pressing issues, and then the government supported it. But here, I like this summary. It's in bullet points. Lord Bantry's involvement reflected several factors: landlord responsibility, government collaboration, and social standing. So that is a nice little conclusion. And what we can do is we can then copy this information and put it into a text document. There's an easy copy button on Perplexity, but you could also just highlight and copy. Now, why would you want to copy it and put it in a different file? For one, other platforms write better than Perplexity, and for 2, you're not going to use all of that context that Perplexity finds for you. Now, you're just going to save this search because it automatically saves it. Don't delete the search. Let Perplexity archive that because that's how you're going to come back to your sources. So the sources are captured. You don't need to worry about crafting the citation just yet until you then go and use it in your final report. And I will highly recommend that you look at the sources that Perplexity gives you. There might be some more nuggets. So that was question 2. And the third question, remember I couldn't figure out the location. So here's what I told Perplexity: write in your natural language. So I told Perplexity, even though I'm covering up a little bit of the text, here's a difficult challenge. My ancestor traveled aboard the 9 ships bound for Canada as part of the Peter Robinson Project. Why am I saying that? Well, perhaps there will be some records that identify where everybody is from that I haven't found yet. And so when it comes to figuring out this location, if I give Perplexity a starting point, it might narrow down the sources and research a little bit better. I don't need help learning about the project, so please don't research that. I need help figuring out where in Cork County my ancestor is from. The original record is difficult to read, but what it looks like is that he's from, and I wrote the name where I transcribed it. I'm not going to even attempt to say it. And then said Cork County, Ireland. However, I can find nothing that resembles this location in searches, and I go on. And then I also add, hey, Lord Bantry recommended my ancestor. Now, why am I doing that? Well, if I put the Peter Robinson Project and that Lord Bantry is signing off on letting my ancestor go, then I've constrained the possibilities and helps Perplexity analyze and likely come up with a better answer. Again, here are the sources. There are additional sources it looked at, and now it gives me an answer. You are correct that this location is well documented, but it is located in Wicklow County, not Cork. Oh, that's interesting. I couldn't even find it at all, but now it's saying it's in Wicklow. But based on the other sources, typically people are going to be from Cork. So I'm really glad I didn't say, hey, tell me about this location, because I have been gone off on a wild goose chase. I'm glad that I included the bounding limitation factors of the Robinson Project and Lord Bantry, because that's going to rule out places Lord Bantry doesn't have jurisdiction over. And if I hadn't put it out there, then Perplexity might have told me about this place in Wicklow, and I have inserted incorrect information. So I really do love that Perplexity is demonstrating to me, oh, well, it could have been this, but I think it might be here. Because it goes on to say, given your ancestor was recommended by Lord Bantry, and he's a major landowner in Bantry area of West Cork, and that the settlers were from Cork, then the most likely explanation, I like it said, it's not definitive, but the most likely explanation, this is what I wrote, and said based on the geography and connection, this is who we recommend. Here's a summary table. I love that. And then it gives me the conclusion. The next thing I did was ask, all right, since I now know the location, I need to know a little bit about that location, the geography, climate. There's maps, there's links, there's geography information, climate, economy, and a summary. Now, I can't remember at the moment which platform I asked. It said, hey, how do you even say this location? And I did get a pronunciation guide, asked for it in layman's terms, not in dictionary terms. And I was able to get that information, but at this moment, I can't figure out where that is. Okay, so what you're going to do is you have your draft that does not have the social context, and you're going to save that as a text file. So if you're using Google Docs, go ahead and download it as plain text. You can use some of the other files, but I found when I'm using the free versions of these tools, it's best to use a TXT file because it strips out all the extra coding. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to make one Word document that has all of your responses, your social context from Perplexity. Now, in this case, I didn't go in and correct the location that I had written in the previous draft. Instead, I'm going to tell the program, hey, I made this correction, and here's some information about that location, the geography. So it looks very similar to what I had in Perplexity, but I'm putting it all in one location. So next, I'm going to go over to Claude. If you're using the free version of Claude, you might have to say, hey, I'm using the free plan. I'm going to give you information a little bit at a time, and then I want you to do these actual steps. So the first thing I did was say, hey, I'm going to upload the rough draft. I want you to retain my writing style and voice in what we're going to write, but don't write anything yet because I want to have some social history context so you don't have to search for it. What's interesting is that Claude will then go and read your file and give you back some insight into your writing. Said it's personal, intimate tone. You bring Dennis to life as an individual. Specific, concrete details with the date, ship names, and so forth. Narrative flow, yes, that's what I'm going for. And emotional resonance, phrases like to my heart content. What's interesting is that Dennis wrote that on the survey. I didn't include that, but Claude is now saying, hey, That's really cool that you added that because it adds some emotional context that we might want to tap into. So that's an interesting analysis that Claude adds. So why Claude versus ChatGPT or Perplexity? You can use Claude or ChatGPT interchangeably. I would recommend trying them both and seeing which styles you like. So since I've featured ChatGPT heavily on this channel before, that's why I'm diving in a little bit with Claude in this video. Perplexity can write your stories, but I just like, this is a personal preference. I just feel like Claude and ChatGPT do a much better job of writing when you give it information, and Perplexity is an awesome search tool. So the next thing I did was I added that file, the highlights file. I downloaded that as a text file, and now I'm uploading it. And I say, here's the historical context that can help expand the story. There's also a note at the beginning. So I'm calling attention. Hey, I found the new location. So make sure you pick up on that and leverage the information to make the swap. It says, thanks for additional context. And then it analyzes it before it gives you any writing or so forth. If you're just saying, hey, this is what I'm giving you, I don't want you to do anything just yet. And I really like this. So we have Lord Bantry's role and motivation, the broader immigration scheme, the geographic and economic context, and the full journey experience. And then it asks me, hey, are you ready to suggest how to integrate this? Or do you have anything else to upload? I simply say, nope, that's all I have. Can we start with creating an outline for the story? Now, I could have just said, hey, go write the story. But two things. One, if you're using the free plan, it will write a shorter story than if you do the writing in chunks, so in sections. And one of the ways to start agreeing with your large language model is to say, let's get an outline, and then we're going to do bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. But it's also a time to agree with the AI tool that, yes, this is what I want the story to look like before you spend any credits or time writing the story. So 2-point strategy. Even if you have the pro plan of Claude or the paid plan of Claude or any tool, I would recommend that if you're giving the tools your draft and some historical context, request an outline in return to ensure that you and the model is on the same page, and then proceed with the writing. So Claude opens a little asset, and then it says, here's the expanded outline. It recommends starting with the island in crisis. This is almost all historical context. Remember, we don't know exactly how Dennis is connected, but I also teach the zoom in technique where you start globally and then get into the household, and this is following that recommendation. Next, we have Dennis's world in West Cork, a geographical description, the climate. He said that when he went to Canada, he was a poor fisherman with not one copper. And notice that Perplexity is breaking up the story and moving aspects of what was in the draft around to make it flow instead of here's the history, here's being on a ship, and so forth. So I really like that it's pulling that information in, and then also talking about what life was like with Lord Bantry. So that puts some of those characters into the story. Since Lord Bantry signed his recommendation, we do want to include him in this narrative. The next is the Peter Robinson scheme, a lifeline for the poor fisherman to start a new life, the decision to leave, journey to Cork, from Cork to Quebec, from Quebec to Peterborough, settling in this place I can't say, 3 years later, and then the reflection where he answers the question, yes, I'm happy to my heart's content. You could also add a legacy section. I'm not a big fan of those, but it's still an option. We can refine this outline and then ask Claude to refine the story. One of the things that you're going to see is Claude is very, very verbose in its chat response to you, telling you the structure maintains your personal approach to Genesis story while incorporating all the risks. I know, but it's one of the quirks of Claude that I haven't been able to figure out. Hey, I don't need all of this, but it's kind of cute. Give it feedback. I love the outline and the information. It's like, oh, thank you. And then it gives you more verbose response. And then what I said was, hey, I want you to start on section 3. What's great about having that outline is these AI models can memorize where it is in the story and you can jump around. The other thing is when you're using the free version, you can do a segment, you hit your limit, and you come back the next time it tells you it can write. And so that's why it's very handy to have that outline and you can jump around. So let me show you a peek at the story. The news came like a whisper at first, passing from cottage to cottage along the shores of Bantry Bay. A government man, Peter Robinson, was organizing an emigration scheme, free passage to Upper Canada, land, tools, provisions. For families like Dennis Hurley's, who had watched their circumstances grow more desperate with each passing season, it seemed too extraordinary to believe. Let's skip ahead. 70 acres, Dennis repeated, the words foreign on his tongue. In this location, most men like him worked patches of land they'd never owned or took to the sea when the earth offered nothing. 70 acres seemed an impossible bounty. So it is really amazing how Claude is adding context to your story. Now, you can see and feel the news whispering from house to house. You may not like that, and it's okay to strip that out. The word spread quickly of this happening. Sometimes I recommend that you show and don't tell. But if you don't know how the word spread, if you wanted to imply that things were whispering, you may be inventing something that didn't happen. Maybe there was a town meeting and somebody cried like in Princess Bride where they announced that the betrothal and the future wedding of Buttercup, maybe that's how the word spread. And then people loudly talk about it. We don't know. So some of the things that Claude will write for you, you might need to say, I'm not comfortable putting that out there. Maybe I'm just going to tell and not show, and then instead you showing with geography or some other elements of the story. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This writing challenge is really fun. I wanted to show you how you could take various tools and take your story from a draft to a final project. Remember, in the write-on challenges, I rarely actually finish the stories. I leave the stories for the viewer to take my starting point and then go finish the story. But if you'd like to see that Robinson scheme a lifeline, it will be in the blog post associated in the link in the description box below, so you can let me know over on the blog after reading it, what parts would you keep and what parts would you take out. But when you comment on this video, let me know what did you like, which tools did you like, what questions do you have about Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT, and so forth. But if you would like to be featured in a future writing challenge, be sure to find that link in the description box because I'm open to having new submissions for future videos. See you next time.